This is the true story of the most unlikely weapon ever used to conquer a fortress city in the Bible. The walls groan, then vanish into dust and silence. A scarlet cord hangs from a window, swaying in the wind. For 6 days, nothing happened. No battle, no cries, only the steady sound of footsteps around a city that waits behind towering walls. Then one command breaks the silence. Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. Moments later, a woman kneels in the ruins of her own home, alive while everything around her has fallen. This is not just a story about a city that fell. It is a story about faith that kept walking when nothing seemed to change. It is about trusting God when His plan made no sense. The lessons hidden in those quiet, obedient footsteps may be exactly what you need to hear today. Stay with us until the very end to discover how Rahab, a woman with no place of honor in Jericho, became part of the family line of Israel's greatest king. If this story speaks to you, please like, share, or subscribe to the Animated Word. It means the world to us. Now let's begin. Long before the walls of Jericho fell, the land of Canaan was filled with violence, false gods, and fear. Its people trusted strong walls and powerful armies more than the living God. The city stood apart, each guarding itself against every neighbor and every stranger. Many years earlier, after the Great Flood, people slowly turned away from God again. Then they gathered to build the Tower of Babel, hoping to make a great name for themselves. God scattered them across the earth, and many nations forgot their Creator. Now, a new chapter is about to begin. Joshua, the servant who took Moses' place, stood at the edge of this troubled land. He was not known for great speeches or clever plans. He was known for one thing above all else. He obeyed God, even when God's commands seemed impossible to understand. Before Israel could enter the land God had promised them, one city stood in their way. That city was Jericho. Jericho was not just another town. It was one of the strongest cities in Canaan. Traders passed through its gates with goods from many lands. Its wealth made it powerful, and its walls made it famous. Around the city stood huge double walls built from thick stone. Some homes were even built into the walls themselves. From the top, guards could see anyone coming from far away. To many people, Jericho looked impossible to defeat. The people inside believed their walls could protect them from any enemy. Strong gates blocked every entrance. Watchmen stood high above the streets, looking across the land day and night. The city had survived many dangers before, and its leaders believed these walls would keep them safe again. But news was spreading across Canaan. People had heard about Israel's God. They heard how He had opened the Red Sea. They heard how mighty kings had already fallen before His people. Every new story made the fear inside Jericho grow stronger. Then word reached the palace that Israel had sent spies into the city. The king wasted no time. He ordered the city gates to be sealed tight. No one was to leave. No stranger was to enter. Guards were placed at every gate and along the walls. Soldiers searched the streets, looking for the two unknown men. Every corner of the city was watched. The king believed that if he could find the spies, he could stop whatever was coming next. The people stayed behind their walls, hoping stone and iron could save them. The king trusted locked gates, armed soldiers, and careful control. He believed fear could protect his city. But walls cannot stop the plans of God. While Jericho tightened its grip in fear, God was already moving in ways no king could see. The battle had not begun, yet the future of the city had already started to change. Joshua stood on the edge of the Jordan River, looking toward the land God had promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Across the water stood cities with high walls, trained armies, and people ready to fight. Behind him stood a nation that had wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Ahead of him was a journey that would test every promise God had made. Joshua knew that victory would not come because Israel had more soldiers or better weapons. Their strength would come from one place alone. They had to remain faithful to the Lord. Deep in his heart, Joshua made a choice that would guide every step he took. Long before the walls of Jericho fell, he had already settled who he would trust. His life would belong to God, no matter what lay ahead. With firm resolve, he declared, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." These were not empty words. They were a promise. Joshua chose to obey God before he knew how every battle would end. He chose faith before he saw victory. Even if God's commands seemed strange, he would follow them without turning back. That promise would soon be tested. What would Joshua do if God told him to fight without attacking? What if God asked the people to wait when they wanted to move? What if the path to victory looked nothing like the plans of great kings and famous armies? The days ahead would answer those questions. Joshua's vow became more than his own decision. It became the heart of Israel's mission. If their leader stayed faithful, the people would have someone to follow. If he trusted God, they could learn to trust him too. The conquest of Canaan would not be won first with swords or spears. It would begin with one man who decided that serving the Lord was worth more than trusting his own understanding. That decision would soon be tested before the eyes of the whole nation. Joshua knew that before Israel moved against Jericho, he needed to understand the city. So he quietly chose 2 trusted men and sent them across Jordan. Their task was simple: enter the city, learn what they could, return without being seen. Under the cover of darkness, the 2 spies slipped into Jericho. They walked through its busy streets, careful not to draw attention. But in a city filled with fear, strangers did not stay hidden for long. News quickly reached the king. Israelite spies have entered the city. At once, the king sent his men to search every street. Their orders were clear: find the spies before they escape. The 2 men found shelter in the house of a woman named Rahab. Her home was built into the city wall. Before long, soldiers stood at her door. The king's message was direct: bring out the men who came to you, because they have come to spy on the whole land. Rahab had a choice to make. She could hand the spies over and save herself. No one would blame her. These were strangers from a nation she had never met. She owed them nothing. Instead, she chose another path. Before the soldiers arrived, Rahab had taken the 2 men up to the flat roof of her house. There she hid them beneath thick stalks of flax that had been laid out to dry in the sun. When the king's men questioned her, she told them the spies had already left the city and urged them to chase after them quickly. The soldiers believed her. They rushed toward the Jordan River, hoping to catch the escaping men. As soon as they left, the city gates were shut behind them. Rahab knew the price of what she had done. If the truth was discovered, she could be put to death. Her family could suffer with her. She had risked her own life and the safety of everyone in her house for 2 men she had only just met. Why would she do such a thing? Because she believed the God of Israel was greater than the walls of Jericho. Her faith was stronger than her fear, and that one brave choice would change her life forever. After the king's men had gone, Rahab climbed to the roof where the 2 spies were hiding. The danger had not passed, but there was something she needed to say before they escaped. She looked at the men and spoke with honesty. I know that the Lord has given this land to your people, she said. We have heard what your God has done. Everyone in this city is afraid. Your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Rahab believed what many others refused to believe. The walls of Jericho looked strong, but she knew they could not stand against the Lord. Then she made one request. I have shown kindness to you. Please promise that you will show kindness to my family. Spare my father, my mother, my brothers, my sisters, and everyone who belongs to me. Save us from death. The spies gave her their word. If you do not tell anyone about us, we will keep our promise. When the Lord gives us the city, we will show you mercy and faithfulness. Then they told her what she must do. She was to tie a scarlet cord in the window through which they would escape. She must gather her whole family inside her house and keep them there. Anyone who stayed inside would be spared. Anyone who left would be responsible for their own life. Rahab agreed without delay. Using the same window that had become a path to safety for the spies, she lowered them down the outside of the city wall with a rope. They disappeared into the darkness and made their way toward the hills. When they were gone, Rahab tied the scarlet cord in her window. It looked like a small piece of rope, but it stood for something much greater. It was a sign of faith. Every time it moved in the wind, it declared that one woman inside a city marked for judgment had chosen the God of Israel over the gods of Jericho. That choice carried a great cost. If her neighbors noticed the cord, questions would come. If the king learned the truth, Rahab and her family could lose everything before Israel ever reached the city. But Rahab had already made her decision. She would trust the Lord, even while surrounded by people who did not. The 2 spies returned safely to Joshua. They told him everything they had seen. The people of Jericho were filled with fear. They believed the Lord had already given the land into Israel's hands. Soon after, God gave Joshua his plan. It was not the plan anyone expected. The soldiers were not told to attack the walls. They were not told to build ladders or break down the gates. They were not told to prepare for a long battle. Instead, the Lord gave a simple command. For 6 days, the army was to march around the city once each day. The priests were to carry the Ark of the Covenant, the sign of God's presence among his people. 7 priests were to walk in front of the Ark, each carrying a ram's horn trumpet. The fighting men would march ahead of the priests. More soldiers would walk behind the Ark. The people were given one clear command. They were not to shout. They were not to speak. Not a single word was to leave their mouths until Joshua gave the order. Joshua gathered the people and repeated the Lord's instructions exactly as they had been given. No one argued. No one demanded an explanation. When the first morning came, the army rose early. The priests lifted the Ark onto their shoulders. The 7 priests took their places with the ram's horn trumpets. The soldiers formed their lines. Then they began to walk. Around the great walls of Jericho they marched. The priests blew the trumpets. The people remained silent. No battle cry filled the air. No arrows were fired. No stones were thrown. When they had gone all the way around the city, they returned to their camp. The next day, they did the same. And the day after that. For 6 days, the people obeyed exactly as God had commanded. The walls still stood. The gates stayed shut. Nothing seemed to change. But every quiet step was an act of faith. Israel did not need to understand God's plan before obeying it. They only needed to trust the one who had given the command. On the 7th day, Israel rose before sunrise. The camp was quiet as the soldiers took their places once more. The priests lifted the Ark of the Covenant onto their shoulders. The 7 priests stood before it, each holding a ram's horn trumpet. Joshua gave the signal, and the people began to march. They walked around Jericho once, then a second time, a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth. Still no one spoke. The only sound was the steady blast of the trumpets and the footsteps of thousands of people moving together. From the top of the walls, the people of Jericho watched in fear. They had seen this strange march for 6 days, but never like this. When Israel finished the 7th lap around the city, everything stopped. For one long moment, there was silence. Then the priests lifted the ram's horn trumpets and blew with all their strength. Joshua raised his voice and gave the command that everyone had been waiting to hear. Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. At once, the whole nation cried out with one mighty shout. The ground trembled beneath their feet. The great walls of Jericho groaned. Stones cracked apart. Dust filled the air. Then, before the eyes of Israel and the terrified people inside the city, the mighty walls collapsed outward. The fortress that had seemed impossible to conquer became a pile of broken stone. For a brief moment, the soldiers stood frozen. They looked at the fallen walls, hardly believing what they had just seen. Then they rushed forward. They crossed over the ruins where the walls had once stood and entered the city from every side. The gates no longer mattered. The strongest defense in Canaan had fallen because the Lord had done exactly what he had promised. The battle was not won by clever plans or greater strength. It was won through trust and obedience. The walls that no army could break fell in a single moment because God had spoken and his people had believed him. As the battle came to an end, smoke rose over the city of Jericho. The mighty fortress that had filled the people of Canaan with pride now lay in ruins. Its walls were broken. Its gates were gone. The city that had trusted in its own strength had fallen before the power of God. But Joshua had not forgotten a promise. Before the battle began, he called the 2 spies who had entered Jericho. He gave them one clear command. Go to the house of Rahab. Bring her out, along with her father, her mother, her brothers, and all who belonged to her, just as you promised. The 2 men hurried through the broken streets until they reached the house marked by the scarlet cord. It was still there. The cord that had hung quietly from the window was now the sign that saved a family. The spies gathered Rahab, her parents, her brothers, and the rest of her family. They led them safely through the fallen walls and away from the danger. While the city around them had been destroyed, every person inside Rahab's house was spared, just as the Lord had promised. Yet their story was not over. Rahab and her family stood outside the ruins with nothing left behind them. Their home was gone. Their city no longer existed. Their neighbors were gone. They had no land to return to and no nation to call their own. Everything they had was now in the hands of the people of Israel. Would Israel truly keep its word? Would the people accept the Canaanite woman who had once lived among their enemies? Would they show mercy to her family, or would they turn them away after the battle was over? Rahab had trusted the God of Israel before she had ever met his people. Now she would discover whether his people would be as faithful as the God they served. The walls had fallen, but another test had just begun. This time, it was not a test of courage in battle. It was a test of whether a promise made in secret would be honored in the light. After the victory, Joshua spoke a warning that the people would remember for generations. He said that anyone who rebuilt the city of Jericho would do so at a terrible cost. The one who laid its foundation would lose his firstborn son. The one who set up its gates would lose his youngest son. Many years passed. Kings rose and fell. New generations were born. The ruins of Jericho stood as a reminder that God's word never fails. Then, centuries later, a man named Heel decided to rebuild the city. He ignored the warning Joshua had spoken long before. As the work began, his firstborn son died. When the gates were finished, his youngest son also died. Everything happened exactly as Joshua had said, proving once again that God's promises and his warnings are always true. Rahab's story ended very differently. The woman who had once lived inside the walls of Jericho was welcomed among the people of Israel. She married into the nation she had once feared. In time, she became part of the family line of King David. Many years later, that same family line led to the birth of Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world. What can we learn from this story? From Joshua, we learn that obedience does not require understanding first. He marched in silence for 6 days without knowing how the walls would fall. He trusted God's command before he saw God's miracle. From Rahab, we learn that your past does not stop God from giving you a new future. She risked her life to protect 2 strangers because she believed in the true God. That one act of faith changed the future of her family forever. From the people of Jericho, we learn that walls built on fear will not stand forever. They trusted stone, gates, and soldiers. But all their strength failed when God's people simply obeyed his word. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the Animated Word and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a like. Tell us in the comments which Bible story we should cover next. Thank you for watching.